All right. Well, thank you all for joining us today for the Happiness Project. My name is Lauren Apicella, Associate Director of Alumni Relations, and with my colleagues, Dean Prashant Malavia, Dean Carrie Pace, and Sarah Tillotson, we are pleased to offer the Happiness Project as part of Operation Cura Personalis, which is a series that encourages our community to make more meaningful connections and take care of themselves and each other with events and workshops that focus on mental health and well-being. In today's session, we have Karen Guggenheim, an EMBA 2015 alumna, and Dr. Robert Biswas-Diener, who will discuss the science of happiness and ways that it can help individuals, organizations, communities, and societies thrive. They're going to introduce you to the global happiness movement and make a case for why happiness is important to individual well-being and organizational health, as well as sharing evidence-based tools, frameworks, and research to overcome the happiness paradox. As a note, we're going to ask you to please mute your microphones and turn your cameras off except when you are speaking. We will have Q&A at the end of this session. Please use the chat function and the raised hand functions to participate. And if you're having any technical difficulties, you can just chat me, Lauren Apicella, privately, and I'll help you out. Also, this session is being recorded and will be shared in the next few days. So with that, I'm done. I'm going to toss it over to Karen and Robert. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much, Lauren, and thank you, Georgetown community. So happy to be able to be here today and to bring my good friend and an amazing expert, Robert Biswas-Diener. Let me begin just very shortly and tell you a little bit about myself. And actually, before coming on, I was thinking about that there really would be no World Happiness Summit without Georgetown. My happiness journey is directly connected to the voyage that I had doing my MBA at Georgetown, and the root of the summit really is unfortunately in loss and trauma, but through a purposeful approach and finding meaning and courage and starting new things and etc. Which we will touch upon today on this approach to happiness. I came to Georgetown. I was welcomed, the welcoming attitude. That's something that we can also talk about. And I experienced healing. I experienced thriving. And after I graduated, I decided to become a social entrepreneur after working at a large communications firm, and decided to really pursue this field and make happiness, make it a thing, make it, put it to the forefront, democratizing happiness. I don't know, the knowledge of it, to bring these world leading experts like Robert to join to unite in a global event that has so many different characteristics. It's a holistic approach to well-being, looking at the workplace, relationships, organizations, communities, and even policy. We have a private event for policy, focus on policy. So I met Robert the first time in Dubai. I think Robert was presenting in the World Government Summit. And what really captivated me was that he was able to synthesize what everybody was talking about about well-being and this science that has emerged in the last 20 years, and really encapsulated very succinctly about how we it's the notion of being connected with positivity and optimism. And so the methods are different, but really the simple concept that it's the shift towards the positive. It's not a rose-colored glasses that challenging things are not challenging, but really this shift towards positivity, and that it's really unique in each individual. So Robert is an expert, of course, in happiness, in well-being, policy, implications, strengths, courage, positive psychology, coaching. He's also known as the Indiana Jones of positive psychology because he travels all around the world and really brings this rich cultural approach to the science of happiness and well-being. And with that, I'd like to welcome Robert.
Thank you so much, Karen. It's delightful to be presenting with you. And thank you, everyone, for being willing to spend a little bit of time with us. Obviously, you could be doing a lot with your time right now, but we're glad you think that this is a worthwhile enough gamble to join us, because we think it's pretty worthwhile ourselves. Just a couple quick notes about myself before we launch into our discussion. Yeah, I've got long hair and I'm wearing this shirt from Southeast Asia and I've got some beaded jewelry. You might form your first impressions based on that, but I want to assure you, I'm a scientist. I'm a hardcore empiricist. I don't have a new age bone in my body. I love statistics. And so really, I'm really interested in things like the reliability and validity of the measures of happiness, in painting a tapestry of insight into happiness that we can have confidence in through repeated and replicated measures. So definitely take me in that spirit, that I am a scientist. And then the last thing I want to say is that although I'm an expert, and thanks for saying that, Karen, I don't believe the role of the expert is to teach. I'm not here to tell you how to be happy, because I think you have loads of experience with being happy. I think the role of the expert is largely to help people think through topics with greater sophistication. So if I throw out comment on research, I don't think I know better than Karen, or that both of us know better than you. Rather, we might just have different language or a different perspective, and it's just something for you to consider with no demands that you convert, if you will.
Thank you, Robert. I welcome people afterwards to Google your name and to look at the amazing body of work you've done during the last 20 years, and it's featured in so many others' work as well. Let's talk about what is happiness, because that's something that presenting and organizing the World Happiness Summit. Whenever I say that, I get a full stop, and people ask me, what is that? What are you talking about? Is that a thing? And so can we take some time right now and explore really, what do we mean by happiness, and what does academia mean by happiness?
Yeah, do you want to start?
You can start.
Okay. I don't think I have a monopoly on the truth. I know a lot of approaches to happiness, but I know it is an elusive concept. One of my favorite definitions is actually Sonia Lubomirsky, who's my colleague, and she says, the definition of happiness is that it's hard to define, but you all kind of know what it is. And we have this intuitive sense that it's this positive experience. Maybe it's some positive thinking, maybe it's some positive feeling. But once you start parsing it, I think in a little bit more, kind of fine gradations than that, well, then you start getting people into camps, right? Oh, I think it's purpose in life. Oh, no, I think it's pleasure. I think it's this, I think it's that. And so overall, I think it's an umbrella that could include a lot of things, but I think it's interesting to talk about what those things might be, because ultimately that maybe is the definition of happiness. That's just my opening volley. I'm curious how you take that.
I agree with you. There are a lot of different definitions, like you've said, and I don't like it when they're so defined, because it's such a unique concept, and that's what I love about it. It's such a leveling ground, like your favorite color. You can't say there's blue or red or that's wrong, because what makes you happy is really intuitive, like you're saying. At the same time, we don't mean like a moment of bliss. It encompasses those moments as well, but it's not like you went to a party and had a great time, and that's what we mean by happiness, and that's wonderful, right? But we're talking about a certain degree of sustainability, which is important, and also a sense of feeling good with your life, feeling aligned, that your relationships are going well, that you're feeling optimistic about your future, that you're able to handle challenges when they come. Because it's also really funny. I've been asked if I go to the summit, then I won't be unhappy anymore. And I think it's the most ridiculous thing. And I've been asked that by very smart people. But no, it doesn't mean that. And my answer is, if somebody hits you with a 2x4 on your face, it's gonna hurt no matter what happens. It's just that when we get into the frameworks on how to build this level of sustainability around life, that when things happen, and they will, large or small, you know how to deal with that, but they're still going to hurt. You just don't have to hurt as long and to go as deep. What do you say about that, Robert?
Yeah, I like what you're saying. First, I think you and I both agree that happiness is always across the world a positive connotation. No one thinks that depression is happiness, or that being super lonely is the core of happiness. Everyone believes that happiness is a positive, whatever, positive experience. But I think it's really interesting that you say that it's something about the durability of this experience over time. And from the scientific point of view, we sometimes think of that as the frequency rather than the intensity of happiness. So imagine, you go to a barbecue, you get a good grade on a paper, you connect with an old friend. Each one of those is sort of like a pleasant moment, and each one is sort of like an upvote. And if you accumulate enough of those upvotes across time, it's sort of like this durable feeling of happiness. So it's chronic happiness in that it extends, but I think you're exactly right to point out that it's not consummate happiness, that it doesn't mean it's a never-ending euphoria. And like you, I mean, it kind of, it gets under my skin a little bit when people are saying things like, oh, I literally, someone said, my dog died this morning, how can I be happy? And I said, I don't think you should. I think you should grieve. And she was quite taken aback. But the idea that, a bout of disappointment or frustration or boredom is kind of okay too. And that doesn't mean that in a broader sense that you're not happy. You're just not happy right that moment, but you probably bounce back to normal state of happiness unless you're living in some kind of awful circumstance.
Would you say, Robert, that happiness has a kind of two components, the emotional and then the cognitive?
Certainly a lot of scientists would say that we understand that happiness is a subjective phenomenon. It's within an individual, although I actually think that you might make a case that it's between individuals too. And that part of it is feeling. So experiencing something like enthusiasm or joy or pride, not arrogance, but like satisfaction in a job well done. Those, calmness, peace, those are all the emotional components. But if you only look at those, I think you miss a sense of meaning and purpose, a sense of mattering, a sense of growth. Some of those types of things that are cognitive. Optimism is one you mentioned. Those are all the ways we think, and they're linked to the ways we feel. But I think that you kind of have to take both into consideration. Some people also would add to that, might there be some kind of spiritual development, element that's not just feeling or thinking. I don't know if you have a thought on that, or if we should go down that rabbit hole or not, but I'm just throwing out that is a widely thought of idea.
Well, for me, yes, I have that component, and I know that some people connect in that way with a sense of purpose or meaning or something larger than themselves, whatever that is. For me, I do have a strong, spiritual component that has elevated my well-being, definitely. So, and that level, personally, yes, I do feel that. I think different people connect different, whether it's the earth or a family or some kind of mission that they have. But for me, I have a strong spiritual sense that has really supported my well-being. I wanted to say, also touch back at what you were pointing out about the two, the emotive and then the cognitive. And I'm not an expert whatsoever. I just I get to hang around with you guys and leech off this information, and I read a lot, obviously. But to me, the cognitive part is the more controllable, learnable part, right? The emotional part is more difficult. So when life happens, okay, if we can activate the cognitive, which is why we also, WHOSAU is so committed to bringing the frameworks, the practices of so many different experts, right? So that you can get, okay, I'm going to set my watch and I'm going to go out outside for a 10-minute walk because, oh, they say that being outside is elevates well-being more than doing, being on the treadmill. I'm feeling bad, I'm feeling lonely. Well, I'm going to call somebody. I'm not going to wait for somebody to call me, but that ties into also altruism. I'm noticing another person, and that ties into mattering. So when you start learning this language, this vocabulary, and put these actions into place, I feel like that provides a scaffolding as well when you have these moments of happiness that are maybe our positive emotion that are not so frequent.
It's really interesting. I think you have really strong intuitions about happiness. I know that you're quick to say that you're not an expert because you're not publishing in journals, but you know, publishing in journals isn't one of the funnest things in the world, Karen. But here's something that I think is kind of, for me, it was revelatory when I started thinking about it. If you think about your emotions, and your thesis is that it's easier to control thinking than emotion, we can't really directly intervene in emotion. If you feel angst and apprehension or stress after a long day and you come home, you can no more just turn the dimmer switch down on your emotion than you can on your heartbeats. Like, you can't just choose to flick off your heart. You don't have, whatever you are, you don't have a direct access to your heart. Your heart's going to go on without you. And that's like a fail safe. Your emotions are the same way, because your emotions are pretty functional. They're helpful for you, so you can't really turn them off. So what we do instead is we intervene in emotions through two other routes primarily. One is physical. You go for a run, you drink a glass of wine, you do some yoga. And by physically intervening, there's a downstream effect on emotions. Or mentally intervening. You can change your thoughts. And again, there's a downstream effect on emotions. And so I do think that's why you find a lot of courses emphasizing things like mindfulness or cognitive reframing or these types of things. The idea that if you can change the way you think, you can change the way you feel or experience. So I do think there is an element of truth to that, for sure.
I want to highlight, Robert, that doesn't mean that, to change the way you think, to accept things that are not acceptable, or things that, that's not what we're saying here either, that it's just changing, a framework to look at something that's awful and look and decide that it's wonderful. That's not what we're saying. But, that I think we can jump into the paradox of happiness, that directly pursuing happiness. So, are you happy? How are you feeling? Are you happy? Are you happy? Are you as happy as yesterday? And I have to say that I was so guilty of this with my kids. Oh my goodness. I must have drove them crazy before I learned all about this. Are you happy? Are you going to do that? Are you happy? And they would look at me like, what are you saying? Because maybe in that moment, it was just even the wrong thing to say. And research has shown that actually we need to take an indirect approach to happiness, and that happiness is really an approach. And when people say choose happiness, it's really choose an approach to get you going to, towards elevating your well-being.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. And gosh, don't we live in such an interesting time? I mean, for the first time recently, we've got this phrase, toxic positivity.
Yeah.
Right. And there's just this emphasis that, oh, we should all be happy all the time. And almost this pressure, I've called it like the tyranny of happiness, but the pressure to just quick reframe everything. Well, what have you learned coming out of the pandemic, or whatever it is? And of course, it's important to be able to put a silver lining on things, but that doesn't necessarily need to be our primary thrust, right? And so you're right about that research. Folks who are highly valuing happiness rather than the process of getting there, it's just like, I'm going to, work out, and instead of just enjoying my workouts, all I care about is the performance right at the end, And I think that kind of shift backfires for people. And it's true, people who really are trying to be happy report being lonelier, they're more susceptible to depression. So have you seen that in your own life, or people that kind of backfiring effect?
Well, I'm just, you triggered the talk that Allison Wagner actually had. She's an Olympian, And she had a world record swimmer and world record holder for I think 16 years. And she shares about how, she was training and all the training, and she thought that, when she won or when she broke the record, then she would be happy. And she said that the moments after she broke the world record, the next, I think she said 5 years, go into depression because she realized that did not make her happy. So all the investment, all the sacrifice, all these moments that were really difficult to go through, and then she accomplished, and she was still not feeling, she hadn't been addressing all the other emotions that she needed to be addressing, and then all the sacrifices and such. And I think that we think that if we move the goalposts, or that once we accomplish, we'll be happy, but we keep moving because we have biology, working against us. So we assimilate, right? Because we need it for survival. But then, like you get the shiny new car in 2 weeks, it's like 2-3 weeks, you don't even notice anymore, right?
Yeah.
And after a year or so, you want a new one.
Yeah, it's such a great point. Well, so Allison, who you and I both know, I can't help but think, and we should ask her sometime, that it was the hunger for the competition, the training, all of that process that was giving her meaning and giving her focus and giving her flow. And then once she arrived, I asked her not all that long ago, okay, so you're outside your Olympic career now. How much do you swim? Like, I imagine oh, you're just this amazing swimmer and you're popping in the pool every morning. She said, well, the thing about being an Olympic medalist and longtime world record holder is that you don't have to swim at all. And I just kind of thought oh, once you achieve your goal, it's almost like this letdown, right? And now she doesn't even have to swim. Whereas probably the compulsion to swim would have been wonderful for her back then. And I'm sure she enjoys swimming. But you're right. I think it's really a lot more about enjoying the process as you go, which in the breakneck speed of the world, it's really rough, I think, just easier said than done.
Absolutely. And the other thing is that, we do, a lot of us grow from challenges. And so, I think that we forget that it's really nice to sit by the swimming pool with a cocktail, but you don't really grow. You're not sitting there sipping a pina colada. So there's also this idea, I think, of challenge, and even flow involves challenges. It's like the connection between being very challenged and then having the skill to accomplish. It's not just that things are easy. So I think as humans, we like to be challenged. Now, obviously, you don't want to, you don't want to put me in charge of your IT department, because that's not going to work out for you.
Challenge.
But as humans, we rise to that. And I think that it's important. Particularly, we've had these conversations about, individuals, yes, are responsible for their well-being and for their happiness, or to a large extent, but there's also the system, and systems like workplace and education and government really, needs to step up and to give space for well-being training, well-being measurement, and then to provide the solutions that are necessary to support organizational health.
I think that's so important, because you said it's easier to kind of adopt a happy mindset. You can affect your own thinking. You could take a course in happy thinking. You could practice it. You could improve on it. And even so, there's a moral hazard in saying, well, if you're not happy, it's because you're just not thinking right. Mm-hmm. Sort of, it's your fault. And so I do think there's something larger and more systemic, the question of whose responsibility is happiness. Well, in some sense, it's every individual's responsibility. Mm-hmm. But is it only the individual's responsibility? Is it also sort of a collective endeavor? And I do think workplaces in particular can't work people to the bone and grind them into dust and then think, well, if they just adopt a mindfulness habit on their way home from work, they'll probably, just keep coming back. So I do think that, for example, organizations have an obligation to try and create conditions and programs that promote the well-being of their employees.
What are the benefits of doing that? Because I know there's a lot of research, and what I find, I'm laughing inside because I was speaking 2 days ago to Jean-Emmanuel Deneuve, he's an expert on happiness at work, and he's out of Oxford. And it's remarkable how we have this thinking that if we introduce these well-being or happiness practices at work, people are going to all of a sudden become lazy. I'm not sure where we get that happiness is laziness, because when I'm happy, I have a lot of energy. I'm creative. I'm doing all kinds of things. So what does research say about the benefits to the organization, the traditional business results from happier employees?
That's a good question. And it's a question that I think is a really exciting question. I'm excited when I can come up with new questions about happiness. So if someone says, oh, does money buy happiness? Well, there's, hundreds, thousands of articles on that topic. So that's not all that new to me. But if you say, what is happiness for? What does happiness do? What does happiness lead to? That's a little more intriguing to me, because it's a little counterintuitive. For a long time, people thought that happiness felt good, and that's why we pursue it. Fair enough, that is true. But it turns out that happiness doesn't just feel good, it's good for you. So here are some of the benefits. At work, people exhibit better organizational behaviors. Happier people are more likely to volunteer to help orient a new hire. They're more likely to show up on time. They take fewer sick days. They get better customer evaluations. They get better supervisor evaluations. They're more likely to get promoted. They're more likely to make more money. And we have really cool studies where we take people in the same major at age 18 and follow them up almost 20 years later. They're almost 40. They all went to the same university. They all had the same major. So you're kind of controlling for their life circumstances. But the people who at age 18 were more cheerful, had a more upbeat disposition, they're making significantly more money 20 years down the road, which I think is really interesting. And there are loads of reasons for that. I mean, it could be that people respond better to happy people than critical jerks. And so you are going to get better customer evaluations. You are going to have people approach you. You're going to make more coalitions at work. That's kind of theoretical. I'm not saying that's the case, but I think it's just interesting that happiness affects the bottom line. And here's one of the most powerful pieces of evidence we have. Being in a good mood boosts your immune system. And I'm not talking about something magical here, like it's going to take away your cancer or some major illness, but it can protect you from the common cold for sure, significantly. And we have really careful, controlled studies around this. And you engage in better health behaviors. You're more likely to wear your seatbelt, less likely to smoke, drink in excess, less likely to drink in excess. And so those people who are just faring well, are happy, they're not calling in sick from work. Mm-hmm. They're showing up more. They're just, and that when I go talk to managers, that's one of the main things that I notice that they really latch on to, because suddenly they're thinking the bottom line, like, okay, maybe this is a happiness program, but I can get people to show up to work,
Those are great points. They're also more engaged, right? So I think that they're more willing to participate and maybe go the extra mile, as it were, because they feel heard, they feel valued, and they want to add value. So, thinking about the work of Isaac Piletensky on mattering, that to me is amazing, his work, and it's so simple, yet it's about people want to add, feel like they need to add value, and they want to feel valuable. And I think that we lose track of that. And it's such an important relationship, particularly in the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really love that he sort of coined that term, right? That mattering, because just like what I do matters, and that's being communicated to me. I'm either getting that sense from my supervisor or from my customers, like, that I matter, and that my work here matters. If you look at huge reviews of what correlates with job satisfaction. It's things like having respect,
Mm-hmm.
being able to use your strengths, in addition to what your compensation is, or do you have clear expectations from your supervisor? And I just think those two things by themselves are often overlooked. Like, I just have an opportunity to bring the best of me to the table, and I get respect for it from others. Like, I feel that I matter. I wish that we could focus just a little bit more on that and less on, compensation packages, although that's also important.
That's also important, yes. And looking at another system, which is incredibly important, looking at policy and government, and I know you're very involved in that aspect as well. What can you say around the research and well-being and the SDGs and policy? How can we put this into policy? I know that New Zealand, sorry, actually put well-being into their country budget, I think in 2019, and Europe is looking at the Beyond GDP initiative. And what is the trend in well-being economics and such?
The policy trend to me is encouraging. I'll tell you, about 20 years ago, I've been in this field for 22 years. And about 20 years ago, I went to a birthday party, my daughter and the daughter of a university economist. And the economist said to me, "What do you do for a living?" And I was excited to be interacting with another academic. And I said, "Well, I study happiness." And he said, "What a waste of time. You'll never be able to study that." And I thought, well, first of all, it's extraordinarily rude to say to someone. But beyond that, I just thought, wow, that's like the main thought people have. They're just, coming with this brazen skepticism. Fast forward 20 years, and I find much less of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you can see that particularly in policy. Even 10 years ago, people are out stumping, trying to make a case that maybe policy was a worthwhile goal. Fast forward to today, Wales has introduced legislation called the Future Generations Act. And it is really saying we want financial well-being, cultural well-being, environmental well-being, and social well-being built into every policy we do. And so if you want to create a transportation policy, you have to justify it across those well-being domains. The state of South Australia, you mentioned Australia before, they thought, what if we educate citizens in happiness? And they rolled out a policy, and on their first go, I think they educated 14,000 South Australians in just basic happiness courses. And you start finding this in more and more places, and each place it kind of crops up a little bit different. Dan Buettner, who wrote the Blue Zones, those books, he does these city level interventions where, because we know that when people gather and connect, that's good for happiness. So he, instead of taking a walk, why don't you take a walk in a group, back when groups were a thing. But, just trying, how can we engineer ways, physically or socially, for people to engage in happiness? And I'll give you just two more quick examples. I know I'm kind of running on here, but in Australia, in Melbourne, they had a program that matched older people who were homeowners who lived alone and foreign students that needed a place to stay. And so they incentivized it and created a structure around it and created a matching program. So now you don't have lonely elders, and you have free, basically, or cheap accommodation for foreigners who also have a cultural experience in that they're living with a local. Little things like that. And green space policy is another great one, because we know living within close proximity to green space and having access to it has an effect on crime, public trust, and all sorts of aspects of well-being. So there are just so many different angles you can take, and people are taking it up, which I think is great. And
economists are too, like Richard Layard out of London School of Economics.
Absolutely.
He's a fire blazer.
Yeah, and John Helliwell, Bruno Frey. I mean, there's tons of economists that are actually Angus Deaton that actually care about this stuff.
Yeah,
so
and they're making the case, that the economic case for happiness, which I think is brilliant, and they're very serious economists. So it's amazing to see it in that perspective. I think we can open the floor to any questions, Lauren, if you'd like, any questions, any comments. We're happy to keep talking or to answer any questions you have or opinions that you want to share. It's a topic that is both trendy and also a little bit complicated, because if we were talking about depression, I think that one thing that I notice is that everybody understands that that's a thing, or anger, and you don't really have to go into explaining it, and is it really a thing? We know intuitively very quickly what anger is and such, but with happiness we kind of dismiss it.
Yeah. Looks like Prashant has a
Prashant.
question. Do you want to come on with video?
Yeah, come on.
Hello.
Hi.
Can you hear me? Yep.
Yes.
I'm not sure I can turn my camera on, but that's okay.
Okay, we can hear you.
I just wanted to ask the question about the distinction that you made, Robert, about the focus on process, and that part resonated with me, and it made me think of, in general, we are goal-directed beings, and we have this choice of focusing on the means to the end or the end itself, and it seems like the fault that we somehow make by instinct or by some quirk of nature is to generally tend to focus on the end and less on the means to the end. And if we were to shift that focus, that's how we sort of get more into the realm of being happier. Am I drawing the right conclusion here, or am I reading too much into all of this?
No, I love the question. I'll offer my thoughts, and Karen, of course, if you have thoughts too. The two metaphors that I like the best are a marriage or a partnership, and fitness. You continually make deposits, right? You continually work on your partnership. You continually work on your health or go to the gym. And you're not focused only on I'm not just like, I can't wait till the very end of my marriage. I'm just working right up till the last day. I'm trying to enjoy each day, and have more upvotes than downvotes along the way. And the same thing when I exercise, I'm not exercising because I'm training for a marathon, although that's also a perfectly fine thing to do. But I would hope that even people who train for a marathon are enjoying their daily runs, not just hating running and hoping that the marathon will feel rewarding. And happiness is the exact same, I think.
I love what you said there, Robert, particularly with the marathon. Marathon runners begin with very short runs. And so, it's about the buildup, and it's about sustainability. And I love when you tie it into the physical, because for some reason we understand, that what we put into our body, or if we exercise, we're going to have an outcome. You've said this before, that it's not that you went to the gym that one time and all of a sudden you're going to have all these results. It's about taking care of that we didn't even talk about rituals and habits, how important those are to well-being, but that ties into it.
Yeah,
I think Daniel has a question.
Yeah, hi Karen, hi Robert. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us today. This has been a really insightful conversation. I heard you both mention earlier on that you had been around the world kind of working with similar content, right, around happiness. And I was wondering if you all had any insights on whether or not perception, approach to happiness varies depending on what cultures you might have experienced, and what are some of the insights you might take from other cultures, other countries, where happiness might manifest itself in a different way, and sort of apply it to our own lives here in America.
Well, Robert's an expert on this one. I mean, really an expert.
I do have a lot to say, but I'll keep it quick. Yeah, happiness has huge cultural differences. First of all, there's differences in how we define happiness a little bit, how we express happiness, and how we experience happiness. So one really big difference, and And it's sometimes hard for me to talk about culture. I'll conflate it sometimes with nations, and I understand that nations aren't cultures and that there's within nation variation. But if you take some Asian nations that typically have collectivist cultures where the unit of measurement is the group rather than the individual, places like Taiwan or South Korea, for example, people in those cultures tend to be more tolerant of negative experiences, and they're not looking for high arousal. So they're not looking for really like rah, rah enthusiasm. They're looking for something more muted but pleasant. So they're looking for harmony, for peace, for a sense of contentment and satisfaction. So that's what they're aspiring to, which is a little bit unique. And they're also more willing to tolerate and accept occasional bouts of depression, sadness, worry, anxiety, any of the so-called negative emotions. If you jump to more Western nations that are more individualistic, the unit of measurement is the individual, what you get is something slightly different. You get a stronger leaning on average towards high arousal emotions. So people do kind of want joy and excitement just a little bit more, and we shoot for a little bit more of that. And we are less tolerant of negative emotional experiences. We feel like they're more toxic, so we often try and avoid them or suppress them. So I don't think that people hailing from one culture or the other are sort of correct or have it all figured out. I think there's something kind of nice about both, and it's kind of nice to learn from both cultures.
Super. I think there's unless we have any questions, please pop in. I was just thinking about how important awareness is also to this whole process, because we were talking about cultural awareness, right? But just self-awareness is critical to be able to have sustainable well-being. And I think there's a recent, I think, well-being model that came out that really talks about awareness on how important that is. Can you share your thoughts on that?
I want you to say more about it, Karen, because I mean, I think that's a great idea. I think for some people, though, they'd say, oh, ignorance is bliss, or being unaware is kind of where happiness is. And if you sort of wake up too much, that maybe that's a road to unhappiness. So I'd love to hear you say more.
Well, I had the recent awareness myself that during challenges, and I've had the experience, the valuable experience of challenges, we can tend to get stuck in the idea of what you lost or in the pain, but to have the awareness that there's also growth, to connect the dots, because I think what happens is that sometimes in the events or issues that occur are so impactful, and of course for a time they're a bit consuming, but on the other side, if you're aware and you connect the dots, you can be like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that, or I didn't process things like this before, or now I have this huge amount of creativity, or now I'm okay public speaking. By the way, when I was doing my MBA and we had the presentations, I would be dying to speak in front of an audience, and now I enjoy it. So I think that awareness, and also we haven't talked about this, but relationships, you brought it up for a little bit, and you were kind of joking with the marriage bit, but relationships, the state of our relationships is the highest indicator of happiness. So awareness is really important in relationship as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like that you talk about challenge, because I think it's a nice bookend in that it goes back to what we started with, which is happiness doesn't mean all happiness all the time. I read a study yesterday of people hiking the Pacific Crest Trail, so what is it, 1,000 miles long, goes from Mexico to Canada, takes months to do. And on the first day, they were all really intrinsically motivated. They thought, this is going to be fun. This is a lifelong dream. I'm so excited, right? And we might say they were happy, right, in what they were doing. Along the way, though, that motivation changed from internal to external, because it was hard. hard when they're in month 2 and they're up in the snow or they're, shivering cold, whatever it is, hungry. And at that point, they were like, I'm only going to finish this because people expect me to, or I'm only going to do this because I'll look foolish if I quit. And their motivation became completely external. And for the people whose motivation was external, they actually finished it. But for the people who just were enjoying, oh, this is all good, they didn't finish. And so I do think there's something about kind of like going through the hardship and sort of understanding that that process isn't going to be enjoyable every step of the way, but you come out the other side. And when you ask those people retrospectively, how was it? They tend to say, hiking the Pacific Crest Trail was amazing. It was one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. Because the memory isn't of every time they couldn't get their stove to light. Their memory was the sense of accomplishment, the people they met along the way, the beautiful things they saw, that type of thing.
I just want to say something before, because I'm seeing some questions, but I think that is also really important to point out that, living life or getting through life or experiencing life just okay is okay. But when you have the opportunity to thrive and you experience all, like you were saying, or be in touch with savoring, with COVID, I realized that outside of my apartment, I had this amazing sunset, but I was traveling so much that I never saw it. It's like, who put the sun there? I never knew, and to really, it's we hear these cliches, stop and smell the flowers, but when you actually stop and look at the flowers, and something happens biologically when you are experiencing beauty and awe, and also to grow and through challenges, like you just said, it's almost like having a sophisticated experience of life. When you experience ways of being which involve forgiveness, and when you forgive something really hard, which doesn't mean, necessarily bring the person back into your life or accept what happened, but there is something quite magical that happens through forgiveness, or expressing gratitude, or pointing out somebody's strengths. There's like this magical thing that happens to you, and I think that's, we experience that in a small sense over 3 days when we through the summit and such. But I think that's something that is really kind of evolved to go there.
It's nice, Karen, because you just mentioned some things that are sort of like the how-tos of happiness, right? Gratitude, forgiveness, using strengths. And ultimately, I think kind of the big overarching one is investing in others. When you lend your time, your money, your expertise, when you give someone a compliment, help them move their furniture, donate to charity, it leads to more connection. It feels good. And it might be connecting you and one other person, or it might just be connecting you to the broader sense of all humans. But that does seem to be a pretty reliable mechanism for avoiding the happiness paradox, avoiding this navel gazing, but still enjoying the process and enjoying happiness along the way.
Fantastic. So someone wrote here that they want to know more about the habits and the rituals. And I think it ties into what you just said right now, that in these ways of being, or these how-tos of happiness, when you inject them in your day or in your week and your month, and whether there's a lot of talk, and we've discussed this before, about the gratitude journal, or the jar, etc., that it could be gratitude when you're brushing your teeth and just thinking how grateful you are, or texting somebody, you're saying it, that it's not like a prescribed approach, but when you do these things, something happens over time, right? And you do them often, that there's a certain, is there a biology that happens? Does the neuroplasticity of the brain is changing? Are all these things happening? Hormones secreting that we want?
Yes, all of those things are happening, and often simultaneously. But I think you're right. And that's why I'm personally skeptical of people saying, oh, you know how to be happiness, just meditate. You know how to be happy, just write down 3 things you're grateful for. those could very well be great things. But for you, it might be putting a post-it note on your toaster saying, little buddy, I overlook you every day and I'm not going to do that today. Or it might just be calling an old friend, right? So it's going to vary a little bit, but the idea is, how can you appreciate, how can you connect with others?
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And what resources we can recommend? My goodness, books, podcasts on the path to happiness. And again, that ties into the rituals also, which I like that idea of, be mindful of what you're listening to, what you're reading, because that does make a difference. And so maybe balance it with some reading that is productive, that it's we all have our guilty pleasures, right? But what are the books that you recommend or podcasts I can share after?
Well, for popular books, I mean, there's just so many books on happiness, and I'm really loath to say, oh, you should try these 8, because there's a lot of overlap in them. So if you want something distinctly how to happiness, well, The How of Happiness by Sonia Lyubomirsky is a good place to start. I think Tal Ben-Shahar's book, Happier, is a good, very slender overview. There's loads of other good ones, though. Do you have a personal favorite?
It's funny because, like you were saying, there is a lot of overlap, but I find that there's certain pieces in each one that just captivates me. I loved Sonia's book. It's like a primer, like you were saying, and Tal is such an easy read. Happier, by the way, so you guys have that. But recently I read Kelly Harding's book on kindness. She's an MD. She's a psychiatrist at Columbia University, and she wrote The Rabbit Effect. And that's pretty cool, on the impact of kindness, actually, from a physician's point of view, and biologically what happens into healing. I like that. And anything by Richard Layard, whether it's happiness or anything, Can We Be Happier? I just really enjoy his work as well. I like Susan David as well. Yeah, and I'm looking at all of my books here.
It's every book I have here in these shelves are.
And of course, your father is a giant in this work. So Ed Diener has so many different publications on subjective well-being. Martin Seligman, I think, also is very good. He brings a different. He's known as called the father of positive psychology by many. But I like his writing. It's just intelligent writing.
He is a good writer. I mean, I now realize that, every bookstore is going to need to have its own happiness section pretty soon. But I think it's going to depend for the people listening in, kind of what your particular take is, because there's more and less academic ones. There's one called The Geography of Bliss, where a curmudgeon just travels the world sort of trying to find happiness, and it's quite funny. There's some about the happiness industry that's quite critical of happiness. Mathieu Richard, the Buddhist monk, wrote a very nice book if you want a more kind of Eastern or mindful approach. There's a little something for everyone out there.
Absolutely. And then as far as other kinds of media, this one's very quirky, and it's from a designer's point of view. So The Happy Film by Stefan Sagmeister, I really enjoyed that because it's so raw, and he's just brilliant. For those of you that don't know Stefan Sagmeister, he's done what Picasso did as a painter, as he did this for designers, for graphic designers. He's incredible. Just his brain is amazing on how he sees the world through a graphic lens, a visual lens. But his film, I thought, was very vulnerable, and he has almost this fight with happiness, right? And he looks at the different modalities, and it's a very vulnerable, very real autobiography in his search for happiness. But he stayed committed, even though he couldn't really get there, but he was committed to the process. And I think that's why I like it. He's so committed to the process.
Yeah, exactly. It's very good.
So do we have any last questions or comments? You were going to say something, Robert?
No, I'll take the time to thank the people here. I mean it. I know that you could be doing almost anything else. And I hate the idea that I'm just speaking into this great eye here and I can't actually interact with all of you, but I really appreciate your time and attention.
Absolutely, me too. And I can't wait until we can gather in person. So here's a question. How is happiness and joy the same thing? How are they different from a scientist point of view?
Well, we would say joy is an emotional state.
Mm-hmm.
So it would fall under a much larger umbrella that we might call well-being or happiness. And it would be one sliver of that piece of fruit called emotion. But it's, joy, you know the experience of joy, your team wins, you see your kid first day coming home from college, whatever it is. Those are joyful moments. And that is important. You wouldn't want to live a life devoid of those experiences, but it's also not sufficient in itself to describe all of happiness.
Mm-hmm. Great point. I think something that I've shared with you is that my layman's view on this subject is that, the experts have done the research much like a chef. A chef prepares the food, and then what we've tried to do with the summit and with Wuhasu is prepare a table and get the tablecloth really nice and then feature the food there. And it's a buffet, and it has maybe breakfast items and lunch and snacks and, evening dinner food. And there might be a vegetarian or a carnivore who's there. And so what we have done, and what I think you guys have done, is like, okay, the fish is fresh, the chicken is thoroughly cooked, but what you're going to eat at what time and how you're going to consume it is up to you, right? And so I almost see like joy and these other kind of emotions, or whether it's mindfulness or forgiveness or optimism or these other aspects are on that table, and you have to kind of make your plate, right? So, if you've been low on joy, go, connect with that, play. One of the things that is like such a mood booster, put your favorite song.
I just wanted to get out of the sun.
I understand, but you can't stop here.
I know. Where should I stop?
You can stop anywhere you want, along the curb up that way.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay,
because
somebody's
I
driving.
know. I didn't know how many people were coming
Yeah.
right now.
Oh,
So.
there'll be a lot.
All right. So that was funny. But yeah, you have to make your own your own kind of plate and your own decisions around that, and dancing, put the song that you like and dance. It takes 5 minutes and do it during the day. Is a great thing to do. And take recovery periods during the day. Boosters, they work. You did an exercise the other day, Robert, where you told people to take, I think, 6 minutes and do things that they thought would make them happy. And it actually works. It does elevate your well-being. So these kind of small actions do over time create big results. So thank you, everyone.
Just on that 6 minutes, I think people don't need to be told what to do to be happy so much as they need time to go do it, and permission to go do it. And that's why I offer the 6 minutes. Like, just give yourself time and permission, even if it's a small amount of time and permission, whatever it is. And it's probably going to work for you.
Excellent.
So, yeah. Thank you so much.
Well,
thank you, everyone. Now off to Lauren.
Thank you both. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Karen. This was wonderful. Just as closing up, we will share the recording the next few days. And we can also, Karen has shared with us an event that we're going to send you all the invites so that you can join next week. But again, we appreciate you guys joining us. Thank you again, Karen and Robert. And that's it, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Robert. Thank you so much. And thank you, team, for inviting us.
Yeah.
Take care, everybody. Have a good night. Thank you. Wonderful.